Welcome to the tutorial, Keeping It Honest, Preventing Plagiarism in Research, created by the Research Services Department at the Mississippi State University Libraries. In this tutorial, we will cover three main areas. We will discuss how the MSU Honor Code defines plagiarism, go over the possible consequences, and answer the question of why it happens so often. Then we will discuss strategies to avoid and prevent plagiarism, including knowing when to cite and what to cite. Finally, we will show you some tools and links that can help you in the research process, particularly when it comes to gathering and saving sources. So let's begin. Some people may not have any idea what plagiarism is. They may think it's only something that happens in certain fields, that it's solely a matter of copy and paste, or in this case, that information found online is fair game. This supervisor seems to have the wrong idea, telling his employee to just steal something off the internet for a plagiarism presentation. Sounds like the higher-ups just told him to do this and he passed it on down, not knowing what the heck it meant. Fortunately today, you will come away with a better understanding than he does. If you go to the MSU Honor Code's website at honorcode.msstate.edu, you will find the policies and procedures which lay out the definitions of academic misconduct. One of those is the definition of plagiarism: the appropriation of another person's ideas, words, processes, results, or images without giving appropriate credit. Note what I did just then on this slide. I gave appropriate credit using quotation marks, a parenthetical citation, and a bibliographic entry using MLA citation style. I also put my own emphasis, however, on the word ideas. Plagiarism, remember, isn't just about copy and paste. When you borrow someone else's ideas, even when you put them in your own words, or you happen to have a similar idea and agree with them, they still need to be given credit. To clarify, plagiarism includes intentionally, knowingly, or carelessly presenting someone else's work as your own, using a direct quote without proper punctuation or citation, paraphrasing or putting in your own words a source without proper citation, attempting to receive credit for work performed by another, and not citing material from the internet, databases, and other electronic resources. What can happen if you are found to be in violation of the Honor Code? Getting caught plagiarizing can lead to various outcomes. These include an XF on your transcript, a lowered overall course grade, a 0 on the assignment on which the plagiarism occurred. In the case of graduate school and DVM students, being placed on academic misconduct probation, an educational sanction requiring completion of the Academic Integrity Intervention Program, and even suspension or expulsion from the university. The university also has the authority to revoke a degree if the violation was discovered after graduation and the sanction would have led to ineligibility or incompletion of the degree requirements. In spite of those outcomes, plagiarism is still common, more so in the last decade. This can be attributed to several factors, according to Ebony Thomas and Kelly Sassy. There is an increase and even expectation in student collaboration via peer reviewing and group assignments, and not every student in the group may follow the rules, or they use the rules of digitally intimate environments that vary from your standard English class. Social media environments that include creative writing, blogging, transformative works, and more lead to a blind acceptance of copy-paste methods. We've all pasted a famous quote on our Facebook wall or Twitter feed. There's also simply so much information out there. 10, 20, even 30 years ago, it was hard to find 10 sources in your library for your paper. Now it's 10 million, and the good information is buried behind paywalls, conspiracy sites, term paper mills, junk web pages, and organizations with their own agendas. It's tempting to just find a paper and print it out. And this leads to plagiarism becoming the #1 academic violation in American high schools and colleges. So with all of these challenges, how do we avoid unintentional or accidental plagiarism? The best way is to always cite your sources. But when should you cite? It can be difficult to know when you need to use a citation. Beyond avoiding copying and pasting, how do you know? It helps to understand the common places that plagiarism can accidentally occur. Sometimes it's a matter of paraphrasing but forgetting to cite, or even badly paraphrasing, where you still use enough of the original source words without credit. Also, sometimes we're not sure whether something needs to be cited at all. You may think, well, everyone knows this fact, but do they? In the following slides, we'll discuss the difference between direct quotations and paraphrasing, and common knowledge versus borrowed facts. If you believe the author's words are the best way to convey the information, then quote and cite. But make sure you use proper punctuation and formatting. For most styles, this is done in two ways. For shorter quotes, just using quotation marks will do. But for longer passages, you may need to do a block quote. This is simply an extra indentation, usually a ½ inch, that makes the passage stand out from the body of your paper. Don't forget your citation at the end. If you are paraphrasing, make sure it is well done. True paraphrasing doesn't mean you just change some of the words around in a sentence so they aren't verbatim. Paraphrasing is almost a reinterpretation of the passage in your own words without changing the meaning. So, for example, if the text reads, Jessica and Cindy walked into a dark room with no flashlights, you wouldn't paraphrase by saying, the two girls walked into an unlit room without any light. All you did was replace the formal names with the generic two girls, swap out dark for unlit, and no flashlight for without any light. That's not very different from the original sentence. A true paraphrase would sound something more like, they were afraid because they didn't have any way to see in such a dark place. Assuming the original source indicates the girl's fear in another sentence, this is a reinterpretation of the original and demonstrates your understanding of the text. Now we get to common knowledge versus borrowed fact. Which merits a citation? And what is an example of common knowledge? Or how do you know if it's actually a borrowed fact? Here's an example in basic science. Common knowledge tells us the sky is blue. This is an observable fact. Anyone looking up can see that on a clear day, the sky is indeed blue. And even if it's cloudy or night, we know the sky is blue when it's clear. Borrowed fact, on the other hand, would be the sky is blue because water molecules in the atmosphere reflect blue or ultraviolet light and absorb red or infrared light. While this is a scientific fact, something we learn in 7th grade science class, we can't assume that it is in fact common. So I found a credible source and I cited it. A good rule of thumb is if you have an urge or instinct to Google it to be sure, if you are unsure, then likely so is your reader. Also remember, common knowledge isn't necessarily universal. American students may know that George Washington was the first president of the United States, but probably not know the first Prime Minister of Canada, which a Canadian student would definitely know. Now, let's look at some tactics and strategies to use in your research process. First, collect methodically and organize. This is a personal process. Just know what works and doesn't work for you. Maybe you like a color-coded system, or note cards, or a computer program like Evernote. If you notice that you keep losing your place when you underline something you want to quote, invest in Post-it notes or a notepad just for research. Just make sure that you're deliberate. Second, writing things down may seem like an unnecessary extra step, but you're actually helping your brain out when you write things down. You're more likely to remember something if you actively wrote it down or typed it out. And because you have a print record, you can always refer to it if you forget something. This can be as simple or complex as you want it to be. It's also a good idea at this time to think of a working bibliography, one that's not your permanent final one for your paper, but one you can refer back to. Saving your documents and your sources is easier with library databases and catalogs. Look for the Save or Keep option and email yourself a record of those sources. And finally, don't procrastinate. Procrastination denies you the luxury of developing a research and writing process. Through this process, you get to correct mistakes, find really rich resources, and take your time with a tedious, arduous process like citing sources. Yes, it can seem like a never-ending string of random punctuation marks and capitalizations, but it needs to be done. When taking notes on sources, it's good to know which parts of a source to note. Most citation styles at the bare minimum will require the authors, the title of the source, and the date it was published. For books, the name of the publisher is usually required as well. If the source is an article, then the name of the journal, the volume, and the issue number is also needed. Website URLs and dates accessed are good to keep, regardless, but they aren't always necessary for every citation style. Check your citation manual and your course syllabus for guidance. Now, you may have questions about a program called Turnitin. Turnitin is a plagiarism detection program that MSU subscribes to. You may be asked to submit papers through this program. When you submit a paper through Turnitin, it checks for similarities across 3 types of sources. 1, an internal database of papers that have been submitted to Turnitin by other users. Papers you submit become part of that database. 2, select commercial databases containing journal articles, theses and dissertations, and other publications. 3, it checks against the open web, including paper mills, Google Scholar, institutional repositories, open access journals, conference papers, and other resources. After checking, Turnitin will produce what is called an originality report, highlighting any matches. The lower the percentage score, the more likely the originality. But be aware that the professors still do the hard work of determining citation and credit. A high percentage of matches could simply mean you used a lot of quotations, even if you cited them. A low score shows paraphrasing, but without citations, it's still plagiarism. If the professor hasn't already done so, ask if the self-checker can be activated, so you can review and revise your work before turning it in officially. And now we look at answering the third question on our agenda. Where do we find help if all of this citation mess has us bogged down and we can't see the forest for the trees? First, know which citation style to use and check out the manuals. For some of you, it may be good practice to purchase the manual and keep it as part of your personal reference library. If cost is a factor, the library has copies you can use in-house. Check with your professor or department, or read your syllabus to know which style to use. Also, if you plan to publish, keep in mind that many journals have their own style guidelines. Speaking of our library, in addition to using our manuals, you can always use our chat service. We're happy to answer citation questions. If a librarian isn't available, you can use our online citation guides. For more advanced researchers, you may want to consider using a citation management program. These are online tools, apps, and programs that you can use to collect and catalog your citations, and even generate citation lists in your documents. Common programs include EndNote, Mendeley, and Zotero. There are both free and pay versions, depending on storage needs. And many databases have their own citation generators. Remember, however, that computer-generated citations may have mistakes, so review and edit accordingly. Finally, you may be wondering, is there any purpose to citation besides avoiding plagiarism? Or is it just a bunch of busy work to make sure we're paying attention? Well, the answer is that citation is simply part of good research. Charles Lipson says in his book, Doing Honest Work in College, that citations have a multitude of purpose. They strengthen your analysis and amplify your ideas by defining unique ideas and giving your ideas authority, reliability, and credibility. Citations are also used to identify and credit the sources you use and to give readers specific information so they can go to these sources themselves if they wish. Think about it. A works cited page or bibliography can be your recommended reading list, guiding novice and experienced researchers alike to new sources or to see older research through a new lens. Citation is the foundation of research, as no research is done solely in a vacuum. We're all inspired by those that came before us. Each of us, as the 12th century theologian John Salisbury once said, stand on the shoulders of giants. For additional help or questions regarding citation or plagiarism, you may contact Research Services through our help page or contact the Student Honor Code office.